Hello, I am John here at the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by Don Hamilton, who wrote an article for us recently for the magazine about his father, noted radical theologian Bill Hamilton. We're going to be chatting today about that article, but first, Don, why don't you let us know a little bit about who you are?
Well, my name's Don Hamilton. Actually, my full name is Donald Bailey Hamilton. I was named for the St. Andrew's theologian Donald McPherson Bailey. That's who my father went and studied under after World War II. And I'm very proud that I was named for such a well-known theologian as Donald Bailey. So I've always been very proud to have that name. I'm not a theologian. I spent my career as a newspaper reporter, mostly covering government and politics in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and in Portland, Oregon. I've recently spent a lot of time writing about my father and about the influence of the death of God, about the impact it had on Dad, and about the impact it had on his family, the 5 of us kids, which was pretty significant for the cultural firestorm that we kind of went through when this hit in the mid 60s.
Yeah, I think some of our readers and viewers may not be familiar with this firestorm of the death of God movement. So have you found a way to sort of concisely explain what exactly radical theology is, or the death of God movement is about?
At the heart of it, he was trying to decide whether it was possible to live a Christian life without a discussion and the existence of an all-seeing, all-knowing God. And a lot of this had to do with my father's experiences in World War II. There was nothing new about the death of God. This is an idea that had been around for a long time, but there was nothing radical about a lot of these theologians. But this was an idea about how to maintain a good Christian life and believe in Jesus without the continuing existence of God in the picture.
Yeah, thanks. And as you mentioned earlier, quite the firestorm occurred when these ideas became popularized. You mentioned some of that backlash in the article in our magazine, but there's a lot more to it. Are there any other stories of what happened in the fallout of this movement that touched you and your dad's work?
Well, a lot of it hit when a lot of this came into the mainstream press. This was really very much kind of an academic discussion. This had been going on at my dad's seminary and a lot of other seminaries. Dad was teaching at what was then called the Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York. And he had been discussing this also on some network religious TV programs in those days too. But the idea was then picked up by the New York Times and some other, the New York Herald Tribune. And then ultimately in April of 1965, that sort of infamous cover on Time magazine, Is God Dead? Let's make note that academics usually don't have their ideas published on the cover of news weekly magazines, and usually don't have their ideas boiled down to 3 words, which is what happened. And that created the firestorm. That's really when it happened. And that's when it crossed over into the mainstream culture. We had a lot of articles about it. We had a lot of reactions to it. We found out later that the seminary where my father was teaching in Rochester was receiving hundreds and hundreds of angry letters. There were death threats. There were letters calling him a communist, which was kind of strange. There was a letter calling for his resignation that came from my best friend's grandmother, which was strange. Members of our church, our Presbyterian church, were calling for his resignation. So it was a little bit like that. And even it crossed over. There was a folk singer named Eric von Schmidt, was a contemporary of Bob Dylan's, who put out an album called Who Knocked the Brains Out of the Sky. I always thought that was a great title. Bob Dylan himself became totally apoplectic at this. I saw an interview later where he talked about seeing that Time magazine cover, Is God Dead? And he just was sputtering mad at that. He said, what would you think if you were God and you saw that? How would you respond to that? Bob, settle down.
So Bob Dylan, maybe not a huge fan of your dad's work.
I guess not. But Bob had such a serious period, religious period, a Christian period at that time too. And he had a whole series of different religious phases that he went through. And I think this was during his Christian phase where this was going on at the same time too. So there was a lot of responses to it, and it hit us. I remember kids in school asking me about it when I was in sixth grade, asking me to explain, your dad thinks God is dead? Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. How could you explain that when you're 11 or 12 years old? That was not easy. So it was a complicated thing to go through as a kid, and it certainly was. Dad felt the impact of that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned to me that you didn't become aware of some of the hate mail that was coming into the university until much, much later. What brought about this later revelation of the mail that the college was receiving?
You know, my siblings and I really started to get interested in the reaction that the Divinity School, the Colgate Rochester Divinity School, was getting at the time. So we found these in the archive, and we got copies of them, and there were something more than 400 of these letters. And we reviewed, we divided up the work, but we reviewed a lot of these letters. A lot of them were very similar. One of them from Indianapolis, somebody sent back a fundraising letter with the words scrawled across it saying, if God's dead, why do you need any money? And there were a lot of angry letters about sent to the school. It's very disappointing, the response that the school had to my father also. They kind of let him down. They sent letters back that saying, well, we don't believe in what he's saying anyway. And they sent letters back to some of these people saying, well, this is just kind of a fad. He's going to change his mind on this eventually. It was sort of a academically patronizing pat on the head is kind of what it seemed like to me. And we think he's going to change his mind sooner or later. He'll come around eventually. And they took away this academic chair that he had. They took away this first year class, this very important first year class that he had. They froze his salary. They did everything but push him out the door. So Dad could sort of see the writing on the wall, and we had to leave.
Yeah. I mean, and you talk at length in the article about the toll it took on your dad, his career, and perhaps even his health. I'm curious the impact all this had on you. You mentioned facing some tough questions on the schoolyard as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid. What other impacts has this had on you and your life?
I didn't really want to move. I mean, that was a difficult move for all of us when we left. I mean, people have had a lot worse situations, and I'm not trying to make this sound worse than it really was. Dad knew what he was doing. He understood his job was to challenge things academically, and he knew that. I've often wondered whether he understood the consequences of it and if he understood the magnitude of this, but he was going through a lot in those days. He started smoking cigarettes, which he had never done before. And I don't think he realized that it was going to really require him to leave. And he left Rochester and got a job at New College in Sarasota, Florida. He told people, no, it's a move too. It's not a move away. But he left seminary and went into mainstream teaching. It's undergraduate. It's a good opportunity. Yeah, maybe, maybe he was right about that, but he never taught in seminary again after that. He always continued writing, and he continued his religious teachings in undergraduate settings, and later at Portland State University in Oregon also. But it was not an easy situation, and the controversy never really went away from him either.
Yeah, well, his work clearly had a very important legacy. And I'm curious if you could speak to that. I know some have credited the radical theology movement with helping to pave the way for feminist theologies, Black liberation theologies, not to mention that the Death of God movement itself does live on and it has its proponents today. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the legacy of your father's theological work.
Well, myself and all of my siblings are very proud of the impact that Dad has had. And as we review all of the material that he's been writing over the years, as we understand further in the academic world the impact that he's had, it's always meant an awful lot to us to see what he's done and to understand the death of God, not just Dad, but Tom Altizer and Richard Rubinstein and Vahanian and the others that had such an impact on all of this too. This has not gone away. This has introduced a lot of new understandings in the discussion of what Christianity means, of what monotheism means, and what religion means in the modern world. We've had I guess the right word is a backlash to this, as we have this discussion in America today about what the separation of church and state means, and all of these conversations about legally, about what these things mean today in America. But I think all of this goes back to the death of God as our attempts to further define what religion in American life means. And I think that we're still struggling with these things. And I think this goes back to the death of God as we try to point out these things. But I think these are critical things as we try to understand better, not just what it means in Christianity, but what it means worldwide, and how we try to approach religious issues, how we try to approach our relationship with God everywhere around the world. And I think that Dad sort of started that movement, and that continues today, and it's going to continue for a long time.
Wow. Thank you, Don. This has been really fascinating, and I'm grateful for the chance to chat with you. For those of you out there who are interested in learning more, you can read Don's article. The link will be in the video description below. The article is called "When My Dad Killed God." So click below for that. Thank you so much, Don, for being here and chatting today.
Great to be with you, John. Thank you very much.